I'm really excited for this next section. So we'll be doing a fireside chat with Andrew Ng. Andrew probably doesn't need any introduction to most folks here. I'm guessing a lot of people have taken some of his classes on Coursera or deep learning. But Andrew's also been a big part of the LangChain story. So I met Andrew a little over 2 years ago at a conference when we started talking about LangChain, and he graciously invited us to do a course on LangChain with deep learning. I think it must have been the second or third one that they ever did, and I know a lot of people here probably watched that course or got started on LangChain because of that course. So Andrew has been a huge part of the LangChain journey, and I'm super excited to welcome him on stage for a fireside chat. So let's welcome Andrew Ng. Thanks for being here.
But by the way, Harrison was really kind. I think Harrison and his team has taught 6 short courses so far on deep learning.ai, and our metrics by net promoter score and so on are that Harrison's courses are among our most highly rated. So as you go take all of Harrison's courses, I think the recent LangGraph one had the clearest explanation I have seen myself of a bunch of agentic concepts. So
They've definitely helped make our courses and explanations better. So thank you guys for that as well. You've obviously touched and thought about so many things in this industry, but one of your takes that I cite a lot, and probably people have heard me talk about, is your take on kind of like talking about the agenticness of an application as opposed to whether something's an agent. And so, as we're here now at an agent conference, maybe we should rename it to an agentic conference, but would you mind kind of like clarifying that? And I think it was like almost a year and a half, 2 years ago that you said that, and so I'm curious if things have changed in your mind since then.
So I remember, actually, Harrison and I both spoke at a conference like over a year ago, and at that time, I think both of us were trying to convince other people that agents are a thing and we should pay attention to it. And that was before, maybe, I think it was midsummer last year, that a bunch of marketers got a hold of the agentic term and started sticking that sticker everywhere until it lost meaning. But to Harrison's question, I think about a year and a half ago, I saw that a lot of people are arguing, is this an agent, is this not? They're different, arguments, is it truly autonomous, not to an agent? And I felt that it was fine to have that argument, but that we would succeed better as a community if we just say that there are degrees to which something is agentic. So, and then if we just say, if you want to build an agentic system with a little bit of autonomy or a lot of autonomy, is all fine. No need to spend time arguing, is this truly an agent? Let's just call all of these things agentic systems with different degrees of autonomy. And I think that actually, hopefully, reduce the amount of time people wasted spend arguing if something is an agent. And let's just call them all agentic and then get on with it. So I think that actually worked out.
Where on that spectrum of kind of like a little autonomy to a lot of autonomy do you see people building for these days?
Yeah, so my team routinely uses LangGraph for our hardest problems, right, with complex flows and so on. I'm also seeing tons of business opportunities that, frankly, are fairly linear workflows or linear with just occasional side branches. So a lot of businesses, there are opportunities where right now we have people looking at a form on a website, doing web search, checking some of the database to see if it's a compliance issue or if there are, someone we shouldn't sell certain stuff to. And it's kind of or take something, copy paste it, maybe do another web search, paste it in a different form. So in business processes, there are actually a lot of fairly linear workflows, or linear with very small loops and occasional branches, usually connoting a failure because they reject this workflow. So I see a lot of opportunity, but one challenge I see businesses have is it's still pretty difficult to look at some stuff that's being done in your business and figure out how to turn it into an agentic workflow. So what is the granularity with which you should break down this thing into micro tasks? And then after you build your initial prototype, if it doesn't work well enough, which of these steps do you work on to improve the performance? So I think that whole bag of skills on how to look at a bunch of stuff that people are doing, break it into sequential steps, where are the small number of branches, how do you put in place evals, all that skill set is still far too rare, I think. And then, of course, there are much more complex agentic workflows I think you heard a bunch about with very complex loops that's very valuable as well. But I see much more, in terms of number of opportunities, still not about value. There's a lot of simpler workflows that I think are still being built out.
let's talk about some of those skills. Like, so you've been doing deep learning. I think a lot of courses are in pursuit of helping people kind of like build agents. And so what are some of the skills that you think agent builders all across the spectrum should kind of like master and get started with?
Boy, it's a good question. I wish I knew a good answer to that. I've been thinking a lot about this actually recently. I think a lot of the challenges, if you have a business process workflow, you often have people in compliance, legal, HR, whatever, doing these steps. How do you put in place the plumbing, either through a land graph type integration, or we'll see if MCP helps with some of that too, to ingest the data, and then how do you prompt or process and do the multiple steps in order to build this end-to-end system? And then one thing I see a lot is putting in place the right evals framework to not only understand the performance of the overall system, but to trace the individual steps. You can hone in on what's the one step that is broken, what's the one prompt that's broken to work on. I find that a lot of teams probably wait longer than they should, just using human evals, where every time you change something, you then sit there and look at a bunch of outputs to see if it's right. I see most teams probably slower to put in place evals, systematic evals, than is ideal. But I find that having the right instincts for what to do next in a project is still really difficult, right? The skilled teams, the teams that are still learning these skills will often, go down blind alleys, right? Where you spend like a few months trying to improve one component. The more experienced team will say, you know what, I don't think this can ever be made to work. So just find a different way around this problem. I wish I knew more efficient ways to get this kind of almost tactile knowledge. Often you're there, you look at the output, look at the trace, look at the Langsmith output, and you just got to make a decision, right, in minutes or hours on what to do next, and that's still very difficult.
And is this kind of like tactile knowledge mostly around LLMs and their limitations, or more around like just the product framing of things and that skill of taking a job and breaking it down? That's something that we're still getting accustomed to.
I think it's all of the above, actually. So I feel like over the last couple of years, AI tool companies have created an amazing set of AI tools. And this includes tools like, land graph, but also ideas like how do you think about RAG? How do you think about building chatbots? Many, many different ways of approaching memory. I don't know, what else? How do you build evals? How do you build guardrails? But I feel like there's this, wide, sprawling array of really exciting tools. One picture I often have in my head is if all you have are, purple Lego bricks, right? You can't build that much interesting stuff. And I think of these tools as being akin to Lego bricks, right? And the more tools you have is as if you don't just have purple Lego bricks, but a red one, and a black one, and a yellow one, and a green one. And as you get more different colored and shaped Lego bricks, you can very quickly assemble them into really cool things. And so I think a lot of these tools, like the ones I was rattling off, as different types of Lego bricks. And when you're trying to build something, sometimes you need that right squiggly, weird-shaped Lego brick, and some people know it and can plug it in and just get the job done. But if you've never built evals of a certain type, then you could actually end up spending 3 extra months doing something that someone else that's done that before could say, oh, well, we should just build evals this way, use the OM as a judge, and just go through that process to get it done much faster. So one of the unfortunate things about AI is not just one tool. And when I'm coding, I just use a whole bunch of different stuff, right? And I'm not a master of enough stuff myself, but I've learned enough tools to assemble them quickly. So yeah, and I think having that practice with different tools also helps with much faster decision making. One other thing is it also changes. So for example, because LLMs have been having longer and longer context memory, a lot of the best practices for RAG from a year and a half ago or whatever are much less relevant today, right? And I remember Harrison was really early to a lot of these things. So I played with the early LangChain, RAG frameworks, recursive summarization and all that. As LM context memories got longer, now we just dump a lot more stuff into LM context. It's not that RAG has gone away, but the hyperparameter tuning has gone way easier. There's a huge range of hyperparameters that work just fine. So as LMs keep progressing, the instincts we honed 2 years ago may or may not be relevant anymore today.
You mentioned a lot of things that I want to talk about. So, okay, what are some of the Lego bricks that are maybe underrated right now that you would recommend that people aren't talking about? Like evals, we had 3 people talk about evals, and I think that's top of people's mind. But what are some things that most people maybe haven't thought of or haven't heard of yet that you would recommend them looking into?
Good question. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe I'll share this. So even though people talk about evals, for some reason people don't do it.
Why don't you think they do it?
And I think it's because people often have. I saw a post on this on evals writer's block. People think of writing evals as this huge thing that you have to do right. I think of evals as something I'm going to throw together really quickly, in 20 minutes, and it's not that good. But it starts to complement my human eyeball evals. And so what often happens, I'll build a system, and there's one problem where I keep on getting regression. I thought I made it work, then it breaks. I thought I made it work, then it breaks. Well, darn it, this is getting annoying. Then I code up a very simple eval, maybe with 5 input examples and some very simple LMS judge to just check for this one regression, right? Did this one thing break? And then I'm not swapping out human evals for automated evals. I'm still looking at the output myself, but when I change something, I'll run this evals to just take this burdensome thing so I don't have to think about it. And then what happens is, just like the way we write English maybe, once you have some slightly helpful but clearly very broken, imperfect eval, then you start to go, you know what? I can improve my eval to make it better, and I can improve it to make it better. So just as when we build a lot of applications, we build some very quick and dirty thing that doesn't work, and we incrementally make it better. For a lot of the way I build evals, I built really awful evals that barely helps. And then when you look at what it does, you go, you know what, this eval's broken, I could fix it. And you incrementally make it better. So that's one thing. Oh, I'll mention one thing that people have talked a lot about, but I think is still underrated. Is the voice stack. It's one of the things that I'm actually very excited about voice applications. A lot of my friends are very excited about voice applications. I see a bunch of large enterprises really excited about voice applications, very large enterprises, very large use cases. For some reason, while there are some developers in this community doing voice, the amount of developer attention on voice stack applications, there is some, right? It's not that people ignored it, but that's one thing that feels much smaller than the large enterprise importance I see, as well as applications coming down the pipe. And not all of this is the real-time voice API. It's not all speech-to-speech native audio in, audio out models. I find those models are very hard to control, but when we use more of an agentic voice stack workflow, which I find much more controllable, AI fan working with a ton of teams on voice stack stuff, that some of which hopefully will be announced in the near future. I'm seeing a lot of very exciting things. And then other things I think underrated, one other one that maybe is not underrated, but more business should do it. I think many of you have seen that developers that use AI assistants in our coding is so much faster than developers that don't. It's been interesting to see how many companies, CIOs and CTOs, still have policies that don't let engineers use AI-assisted coding. I think maybe sometimes for good reasons, but I think we have to get past that because, frankly, I don't know, my teams and I just hate to ever have to code again without AI assistance. But I think some businesses still need to get through that. I think underrated is the idea that I think everyone should learn to code. One fun fact about AI Fund, everyone in AI Fund, including the person that runs our front desk receptionist and my CFO and my and the general counsel, everyone in AI Fund actually knows how to code. And it's not that I want them to be software engineers, they're not. But in their respective job functions, many of them, by learning a little bit about how to code, are better able to tell a computer what they want it to do. And so it's actually driving meaningful productivity improvements across all of these job functions that are not software engineering. So that's been exciting as well.
Talking about kind of like AI coding, what tools are you using for that personally?
So we're working on some things that we've not yet announced.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah. So maybe I do use Cursor, Windsurf, and some other things. Yeah.
All right, we'll come back to that later. Talking about voice, if people here want to get into voice and they're familiar with building kind of like agents with LLMs, how similar is it? Are there a lot of ideas that are transferable, or what's new? What will they have to learn?
Yeah, so it turns out there are a lot of applications where I think voice is important. It creates certain interactions that are much more. It turns out that it turns out from an application perspective, input text prompt is kind of intimidating, right? For a lot of applications, well, we can go to the user and say, tell me what you think, here's a block of text prompt, write a bunch of text for me. That's actually very intimidating for users. And one of the problems with that is people can use backspace, and so, people are just slower to respond via text. Whereas for voice, time rolls forward, you just have to keep talking, you could change your mind, you could actually say, oh, I changed my mind, forget that earlier thing, and our model's actually pretty good at dealing with it. But I find that there are a lot of applications where the user friction to just getting them to use it is lower. We just say, tell me what you think, and then they respond in voice. So in terms of voice, the one biggest difference is in terms of engine requirements is latency, because if someone says something, you kind of really want to respond in, I don't know, sub 1 second, right? Less than 500 milliseconds is great, but really, ideally, sub 1 second. And we have a lot of agentic workflows that will run for many seconds. So when DeepLearn.ai worked with Real Avatar to build an avatar of me, this is on a webpage, you can talk to an avatar of me if you want. Our initial version had kind of 5 to 9 seconds of latency, and it's just a bad user experience. You say something, 9 seconds of silence, then my avatar responds. But so we wound up building things like, we call it a pre-response. So just as, if you ask me a question, I might go, that's interesting, or let me think about that. So we prompted an LM to basically do that, to hide the latency, and it actually seems to work great. And there are all these other little tricks as well. Turns out if you're building a voice customer service chatbot, it turns out that if you play background noise of a customer contact center instead of dead silence, people are much more accepting of that latency. So I find that there are a lot of these things that are different than a pure text-based LLM. But in applications where a voice-based modality lets a user be comfortable and just start talking, I think it sometimes really reduces the user friction to getting some information out of them in a safe. I think when we talk, we don't feel like we need to deliver perfection as much as when we write. So it's somehow easier for people to just start blurting out their ideas and change their mind and go back and forth. And that lets us get the information from them that we need to help the user to move forward.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
One of the new things that's out there, and you mentioned briefly, is MCP. How are you seeing that transform how people are building apps, what types of apps they're building, or what's generally happening in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think it's really exciting. Just this morning, we released with Anthropic short course on MCP. I actually saw a lot of stuff, on the interweb on MCP that I thought was quite confusing. So when we got together in Anthropic, we said, let's create a really good short course on MCP that explains it clearly. I think MCP is fantastic. I think it was a very clear market gap, and that OpenAI adopted it also, I think, speaks to the importance of this. I think the MCP standard will continue to evolve, right? So for example, I think many of you know what MCP is, right? Makes it much easier for agents primarily, but frankly, I think other types of software to plug into different types of data. When I'm using LMs myself, or when I'm building applications, frankly, for a lot of us, we spend so much time on the plumbing, right? So I think for those of you from large enterprises as well, the AI, especially reasoning models, are like pretty darn intelligent. They could do a lot of stuff when given the right context. But so I find that my team spend a lot of time working on the plumbing, on the data integrations to get the context to the LLM to make it do something that often is pretty sensible when it has the right input context. So MCP, I think, is a fantastic way to try to standardize the interface to a lot of tools or API calls as well as data sources. It feels a little bit like Wild West. A lot of MCP servers you find on the internet do not work, right? And then the authentication systems are kind of, even for the very large companies, with MCP servers, they're a little bit clunky. It's not clear if the authentication token totally works and when it expires. There's a lot of that going on. I think the MCP protocol itself is also early. Right now, MCP gives a long list of the resources available. Eventually, I think we'll need some more hierarchical discovery. Imagine you want to build something, I don't know, I don't know if there ever be an MCP interface to a LangGraph, but LangGraph has so many API calls, you just can't have like a long list of everything under the sun for an agent to sort out. So I think some sort of hierarchical discovery mechanism. So I think MCP is a really fantastic first step. Definitely encourage you to learn about it. It will make your life easier, probably, if you find a good MCP server implementations to help with some of the data integrations. And I think it'll be important. This idea of when you have n models or n agents and m data sources, it should not be an n times m effort to do all the integrations. It should be n plus m. And I think MCP is a fantastic first step. It will need to evolve, but I think it's a fantastic first step toward that type of data integration.
Another type of protocol that's seen less buzz than MCP is some of the agent-to-agent stuff. And I remember when we were at a conference a year or so ago, I think you were talking about multi-agent systems, which this would kind of enable. So how do you see some of the multi-agent or agent-to-agent stuff evolving?
Yeah, so I think, agentic AI is still so early. Most of us, right, including me, we struggle to even make our code work. And so making my code, my agent work with someone else's agent, it feels like a too miracle, requirement. So I see that when one team is building a multi-agent system, that often works because we build a bunch of agents, they communicate with themselves, we understand the protocols, blah, blah, that works. But right now, at least at this moment in time, and maybe I'm off, the number of examples I'm seeing of when one team's agent or collection of agents successfully engages a totally different team's agent or collection of agents, I think we're a little bit early to that. I'm sure we'll get there, but I'm not personally seeing real success, huge success stories of that yet. I'm not sure if you're seeing.
No, I agree. I think it's super early. I think if MCP is early, I think agent-to-agent stuff is even earlier. Another thing that's kind of like top of people's mind right now is kind of vibe coding and all of that. And you touched on it a little bit earlier with how people are using these AI coding assistants. But how do you think about vibe coding? Is that a different skill than before? What kind of purpose does that serve in the world?
Yeah, but I think many of us code with barely looking at the code, right? I think it's a fantastic thing to be doing. I think it's unfortunate that called vibe coding because it's misleading a lot of people into thinking, just go with the vibes, accept this, reject that. And frankly, when I'm coding for a day, with vibe coding or whatever, with AI coding assistance, I'm frankly exhausted by the end of the day. This is a deeply intellectual exercise. And so I think the name is unfortunate, but the phenomenon is real and it's been taking off and is great. So over the last year, a few people have been advising others to not learn to code on the basis that AI will automate coding. I think we'll look back at some of the worst career advice ever given. Because over the last many decades, as coding became easier, more people started to code. So it turns out, when we went from punch cards to keyboards and terminals, right? Or when it turns out, I actually found some very old articles. When programming went from assembly language to literally COBOL, there were people arguing back then, we have COBOL, it's so easy, we don't need programmers anymore. And obviously, when it became easier, more people learned to code. And so with AI coding assistance, a lot more people should code. But I think, and it turns out one of the most important skills of the future for developers and non-developers is the ability to tell a computer exactly what you want so they will do it for you. And I think understanding at some level, which all of you do, I know, but understanding at some level how a computer works lets you prompt or instruct the computer much more precisely, which is why I still try to advise everyone to learn one programming language, learn Python or something. And then I think, so maybe some of you know this, I personally am a much stronger Python developer than, say, JavaScript, right? But with AI-assisted coding, I now write a lot more JavaScript and TypeScript code than I ever used to. But even when debugging, JavaScript code that something else wrote for me that I didn't write with my own fingers, really understanding what are the error cases? What does this mean? That's been really important for me to debug my JavaScript code. So.
If you don't like the name vibe coding, do you have a better name in mind?
Oh, that's a good question. I should think about that.
We'll get back to you on that.
That's a good question.
One of the things that you announced recently is a new fund for AI fund, so congrats on that.
Oh, thank
For
you.
people in the audience who are maybe thinking of starting a startup or looking into that, what advice would you have for them?
So AI Fund's a venture studio, so we build companies and we exclusively invest in companies that we co-founded. So I think in terms of looking back on AI Fund's lessons learned, I would say the number one predictor of a startup success is speed. I know we're in Silicon Valley, but I see a lot of people that I've never seen yet the speed with which a skilled team can execute. And if you've never seen it before, I know many of you have seen it, it's just so much faster than anything that slower businesses know how to do. And I think the number two predictor, also very important, is technical knowledge. It turns out if we look at the skills needed to build a startup, there's some things like how do you market, how do you sell, how do you price, all that is important, but that knowledge has been around, so it's a little bit more widespread. But the knowledge that's really rare is how does technology actually work? Because technology has been evolving so quickly. So I have deep respect for the go-to-market people. Pricing is hard, marketing is hard, positioning is hard, but that knowledge is more diffuse, and the most rare resource is someone that really understands how the technology works. So AI Fund, we really like working with deeply technical people that have good instincts or understands, do this, don't do that. This lets you go twice as fast. And then I think a lot of the business stuff, that knowledge is very important, but it's usually easier to figure out.
All right, that's great advice for starting something. We are going to wrap this up. We're going to go to a break now, but before we do, please join me in giving Andrew a big hand, and thank you.
Thank you.